everyone. I appreciate so many of you attending on what is a holiday week here in the U.S. We know a lot of folks are on vacation, so if you're sitting at the beach and you're looking at your laptop or phone, we certainly appreciate your attention. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We've got guest presenters. We'll have some PlugFest updates, and we're going to talk a little bit about Omniair, a few things that are happening in the life of Omniair. For those that are not Omniair members, I think one of the unique things about this organization is we do have the sort of a full representation of the connected vehicle and tolling ecosystems, from automotive OEMs to device manufacturers to test labs, test equipment providers, research institutes, and of course deploying agencies. So if this is something that you might find of interest, please click on the QR code for more information or just reach out to one of the team. I would like to welcome two new members who have joined in the past month, and LG Electronics and Parsons. Do we have anyone from LG Electronics here? I know it's a little bit of a late hour in Korea, but I don't think LG needs any great description. One of the world's largest electronics manufacturers and a leader in both the early days of DSRC and C-V2X. And they're doing some really interesting work at NTN and all sorts of things. So we're excited to have them here with us. I know they visited during the PlugFest and just so excited that they're part of the membership. And then I think we do have Raphael from Parsons online. Raphael, are you there?
Yes, yeah, I'm here.
Good to see you, sir. Why don't you just introduce yourself and introduce Parsons to the group?
Yes, definitely. So I'm Rafal Ignatovich. I'm the ITS project manager here at Parsons. I've been working here for a couple of years. But Parsons, as an introduction to Parsons, is an industry leader providing advanced traffic management systems and other intelligent transportation systems and solutions. We have offices around the world, Europe, Middle East, US, and we deploy technology and connect the world essentially. So we've been in the CV space for quite some time as well, and happy to join Omniair and see how we can work together with everybody else here.
Well, fantastic, sir. And what part of the world are you in? Are you
I am in Chicago.
Chicago? Fantastic. And I do believe the Dmitry Kizniak is with Parsons and has been a long time supporter of Omniair. So we're excited to have you guys in the fold.
Right. Yeah, me and Dimitri will be splitting duties on here, and he's in California, and I'm in Chicago.
Fantastic. More than enough work to go around. All right, let's move on. So we had an exciting announcement at PlugFest. Edifos is one of our longstanding members from Korea. They had a V2X Air OBU, which is a small form factor OBU that fits right in a shirt pocket. It's pretty exciting to see the development and the progress on aftermarket OBUs. And we were so glad in working with them to be able to award certification for their V2X Air device. We had a big foam board and a certificate and a little ceremony during the PlugFest workshop. And I don't know if anyone from Edifos is on the call. I suspect given the late hour in Korea, it's unlikely. But congratulations to the Edifos team and of course to TTA that completed that certification testing at their laboratory in Korea. Next. PlugFest. Speaking of PlugFest, we just returned from a week in Florida. It was a fantastic PlugFest. We had really a record number of test stations and device manufacturers participating. We did some very unique things, including some SCMS interoperability testing. We did ITS World Congress device validation testing for the day one deployment district. And then we had about a dozen test stations and about 3 in the lab and 3 or more in the field. And just had great participation. Although US DOT had some travel restrictions, we were excited to welcome NIST, some US DOT contractors, as well as folks from NTIA Boulder. We did some demos of V2X tolling, which was quite exciting, and we'll have more on that a little bit later. Next, please. So just a couple of highlights, over a dozen device manufacturers participating. We had 18 devices. Over half of those were OBUs. It's a reverse from the last PlugFest. So we're starting to see the OBU aftermarket really heat up, and some new devices coming in. Participants that had never participated before, including No Traffic and MyoVision. We're very excited to have them. We had just wonderful space at SunTrax, brand new laboratory facilities. So we accommodated a dozen test stations, and then each of the device manufacturers were able to have their own bench. We built on the progress of our virtual SCMS interoperability test event, and we did some real SCMS to SCMS interoperability testing, and we had 4 active SCMS providers, and I know we have some big plans to build on that in the fall. I mentioned the day one deployment district. We had Georgia DOT present. We did some of that validation testing. I know that Randy is working furiously on results. He'll talk a little bit more about his observations during the working group updates. But we will have a deep dive at our next technical working group on PlugFest results. So look for that. And the next one, I think, was about 2 weeks out. One of the things that we started at the San Diego PlugFest in the fall, and then we repeated here, were technical deep dive discussions and product demonstrations twice a day during PlugFest week. So when folks were not in testing, they had an opportunity to hear from experts, and we had some of the SCMS providers, Qualcomm, NIST, Keysight and Waytees, SCMS Manager, Indra, Audi, and several others participating in that. We had a half-day workshop, 2 very exciting panels, one moderated by Steve Novosad on V2X testing and deployment. We had representation from Georgia DOT and Florida DOT, and then PJ Wilkins of E-ZPass, who happens to be chair of our board, had a really fascinating discussion on V2X tolling and kind of that exciting future there with Indra and CAPS and Florida Turnpike and North Texas Tollway Authority and a few others. We had a keynote presentation from Pamela Foster at SunTrax, and a featured presentation from Susan Murtha on eVTOLs as we start thinking beyond terrestrial V2X and what that world of connectivity in the skies might be. So that was fantastic. And of course, 2 V2X tolling demonstrations in the field, and one demonstration of intersection validation, which relates to the presentation that you'll see a little bit later today. Next, please. And as always, the opportunity for networking and collaboration at a very technical level and a little bit of fun is part of what makes PlugFest special. You can see Mike Brown from Swery there swinging an axe. We did axe throwing for our Thursday reception. Very, very exciting there. And just thank you to everyone who helped to make that event a huge success. We are laying the groundwork for Fall PlugFest. We're looking at locations in the Midwest. And so look for an announcement in June, and we'll be opening registration at that time with early bird pricing availability. Next, please. One new item is that we have created a team for a Tiger team, which hangs off of our working groups. This one is a Tiger team of the cybersecurity working group, and it is for developing test cases for misbehavior detection. That's required, of course, for all devices in the China market. We believe that will be required here as well, and we'll be incorporating that into our certification. This group is aiming to develop between 5 and 7 new test cases for that, and this will tie into some policy activities that are happening at SCMS Manager. We're starting to cooperate with that organization a little bit more. Anthony Lopez, Dr. Lopez, will be from Qualcomm, will be leading that team. I don't know if Dr. Lopez is on the call. It is because we have a number of participants from our members in Asia. That is a time that is more convenient for Asia, 8 p.m. Eastern on the second Monday of each month. And we look forward to kicking that off very shortly. Next, please. So one thing that I just wanted to address very shortly, in the past couple of weeks, we've received a number of pointed questions about whether OmniAir is quote unquote pro NextNav, or whether we are why we're not engaged in some of the policy fights associated with the spectrum reallocation proposals that could impact tolling. We've also received the same questions, quite frankly, on the connected vehicle side, whether we're not pro LTE V2X or direct V2X direct, where we are on technology neutrality, and then why we aren't more engaged in advocacy. I have a fairly lengthy op-ed that will appear in the next newsletter, and that you can find it on our website now. But essentially, our role as a certification body requires a degree of impartiality and neutrality that is not consistent with being a lobbyist or playing an advocacy role. I've spent much of my career as a quote unquote lobbyist on Capitol Hill for a couple of different industries, and I know the passions that come with that, the importance of that. But our role is a different one, and it's building trust in the technology through really impartial and fair testing. We like to think we're umpires calling balls and strikes, and we think that in of itself will help to build the industry and propel trust in these technologies. So do take a time to read that op-ed, and if you have questions about it, feel free to reach out to me or to any of the team if you have any concerns. Next, please. So speaking of the Federal Communications Commission, I believe that we have Mark Johnson, our counsel, on. Mark, are you here?
Jason, I am here.
Very good. So Mark serves as our general counsel. I've worked with Mark over the past, 25 plus years, since my days at ITS America, just one of the best telecommunication attorneys around. And we saw that there was a vote last week by the FCC to take some action regarding Chinese and other country-owned labs that may be of concern, and just wanted to get Mark's insights on this and how this might impact FCC certification testing for our members. Next, please. Mark, floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason. Hello to everybody. Okay, great. Okay, just one slide. Okay, great. So I'll try to make this quick. I know there's a lot of other stuff Jason and the team wants to get to. Though I think this is kind of an important kind of informational item for the OmniAir community generally. I don't think it requires any action by OmniAir itself or its members, but it may affect certain test labs that are involved in the FCC certification process for OmniAir radio devices for C-V2X that may be submitted for OmniAir approval and testing, et cetera. So last week the commission at their monthly meeting released a report and order that imposes I guess new potential restrictions on the availability of what they call TCB, telecommunications certification boards, and test labs and laboratory accreditation boards that are involved in the FCC equipment authorization process. And basically, you can see the second bullet there, the new rule. It says basically is trying to identify labs in particular and TCBs that may be owned by or controlled by or subject to the direction of so-called new prohibited entities. And if that's the case, if they meet the standards that's in this new R&O, those entities cannot participate in the U.S. equipment authorization program. Now, so I think important to kind of put this in context. This step by the commission is really, another example, I think, of the general effort by the U.S. government to limit, in particular, obviously, the involvement of and equipment from entities in China that may be subject to Chinese government control, either directly or indirectly, to participate in the U.S. market. If you recall, I'm sure people remember a couple of years ago that the commission released a list of what they called covered basically prohibited devices and services from certain entities, and in particular Huawei and ZTE. That was kind of a big deal, and we looked at that time. So this, I think, this order kind of flows from that, and it is part of, I think, the kind of the general, as I said, kind of U.S. government review that's been going on for several administrations. And about Chinese involvement, influence in, devices and services that may pose national security threats to the United States. So, the new rule, as I said, is it basically says that TCBs and test labs and laboratory accreditation boards that are owned by, and they say, either 10% or more equity of voting interest, controlled by, that's not defined, or subject to the direction of these so-called prohibitive entities, cannot participate in the U.S. equipment authorization program that's managed by the FCC. So the question then, obviously, what is a prohibited entity? So these are first step, kind of the first group is I already kind of referenced it. These are entities named on what's called the FCC's covered list for equipment and services that pose as national security threat. The example, as I said, was Huawei and ZTE. However, the FCC in this report and order went a little further and looked at other lists, kind of what they call foreign adversary countries or national security threat lists, where other entities may be named by other departments in the U.S. government. These are Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, Homeland Security. There's about another 6 or 7 lists that the FCC culled from. So obviously, this is, as I said, this is targeted toward China. It's not limited to that. It's Russia or Venezuela, but China being the largest concern. So there's a couple things that the next steps that once this the new rules get adopted, published into the Federal Register, and then become effective, is that all current, we call recognized TCBs, test labs, and laboratory accreditation boards, that is those that are currently approved, recognized, participate in the FCC equipment authorization program, have to do kind of 2 reporting steps. One is that certify that they're not controlled, owned, or subject to the direction of a prohibited entity, and then that's within 30 days, and then within, I think, 90 days after the rules become effective, and then report on their ownership interests over 5%. And that can be government ownership, it could be kind of public-private, it could be private, it could be university, that type of stuff. So the question then, I think, Jason, you posed at the beginning is, what's the effect on the OmniAir program? Again, I don't think it requires any action by OmniAir itself or any members, though I think where it could have an effect, I mean, there are labs, test labs, that are involved, approved labs that are involved in the OmniAir program. Now, if they are part, I would assume they are, recognized labs under the FCC, they are going to have to report back to the commission on that, about are they owned, controlled, or subject to direction of prohibited entity. I think probably the practical effect is, and I didn't know this, but it kind of makes sense, is that 75, there are FCC recognized labs in China, okay? And there are, according to the commission in this report and order, they said 75% of certified devices, that is devices that go through the FCC authorization process, are tested by recognized labs in China. Now, that doesn't mean that all recognized labs in China cannot continue to be that, to have that status, or to be used. But the commission, by this rule, is trying to identify and then therefore weed out those that may be subject in particular to control, either direct or indirect, by the Chinese government. So I don't know, and maybe I don't know anybody out here knows, is what's the involvement of Chinese labs in authorizing devices that maybe go to FCC, go to OmniAir certification, but that's an issue. So I think that's probably where we're going.
Mark, thank you so much for that. I appreciate the insights, and I would just encourage you to put your email in the chat box in case folks do have questions. For Omniair, we have a network of authorized test houses or test laboratories around the world. None of those are in the People's Republic of China or Hong Kong, which would be subject to this. We do have labs in Taiwan, just not subject to this order. We have them in Korea, in Europe, and in the United States. We do require FCC test equipment authorization or FCC certification as a prerequisite for Omniair certification. And currently, applicants can conduct that FCC testing in any FCC authorized test house. The question is whether there is a foreign Chinese ownership or control of the labs in China. Not all of them have that foreign ownership, but many are subject to JVs, and so that will be applicable. I see one question from Nick Hagemeyer. Nick, did you just want to ask your question to Mark?
Sure. Is there any insight into whether FCC will be rescinding certification for those devices certified by these prohibited entities?
Let me double check on that because I'm trying to remember, and I'll put in the chat. So let's go on. Let me
Yeah.
okay. Let me see if they said anything on that.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that and appreciate the deep dive into this. And in the interest of time, we're going to move on, and we'll continue to track this. I'm going to ask Randy Roebuck to do a kind of a whirlwind tour through our working group updates. He'll also have a couple of insights on and learnings from the Plugfest, and then we'll move on to our guest speakers. Mr. Roebuck, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Jason. We don't have any documents going through the review process right now. Jason did mention Edifice. It was granted certification at Plugfest. The VDEX Technical Working Group, we had 2 meetings in May. Our next one is June 10th. We gave some SunTrax Plugfest summary overview, basically the same slides. That Jason presented one, and I'll present the second one after this. We are preparing the test read notes and anonymous detailing and plan to present those at the next one on June 10th. The AVD sub-working group should restart in June with the J3115 ballot closing in early June. Then we did start a very lengthy network VDEX scoping and discussion session, which we're going to be expanding on here this summer. And most of the detailed technical working group will be going on in the RSU infrastructure, where there's a lot of virtual RSUs. On the cybersecurity, most of our working groups have went to a monthly cadence, and the ones who happen to be on the same week as Plugfest got canceled. So the next one for cybersecurity is June the 3rd, but they did hold 2 SCMS working sessions at Plugfest. One of them was on the 1609.2.1 process refinement. And also they had a working group for the misbehavior detection, which led to this Tiger team or sub-working group to be started and led by Anthony Lopez, which Jason mentioned earlier. The Plugfest Tech Prep is off, and we're evaluating facilities in the Midwest, Detroit area specifically. And I actually went in with some test tools last week and took PCAP captures in the Ann Arbor area, which there's 20 intersections up and running. And there's approximately 10 intersections on Mountain Realm Road, which is by the GM Tech Center and above. So they're all broadcasting, and I do have PCAPs of that area. Next slide. The Connected Infrastructure and RSU group, they had a presentation. Arizona presented on sensors and connected vehicles by Dr. Larry Head. Then they're continuing to review the 401 RSU standard and 785/1218 updates. They are looking at some SDSM messaging that's just getting started. And they actually had a second task force group started, 4001 Connected Innards being led by Eric Rahman. Nick, you're online. Do you want to add anything to your status for
I think you
this
did a great,
group?
I think you did a great job. Thanks.
Okay. The application testing, it got canceled. And their next one is June 17th. The tolling and emerging payments. It was actually the same week as PlugFest, and that next one is this coming up Monday. The two VDAX tolling demonstrations at PlugFest is sparking interest, and we're going to be leading down that VDAX scenario, and actually Jason will be presenting the VDAX
Perfect.
technology at the next
I'll let you
Easy
know how it
Pass
goes.
meeting, June,
Period.
I believe June
More
12th
of
at
a
Thousand Islands. Do
meet
you
and
want to add
greet
anything, Jason, on that perspective?
to introduce the idea of contract work and see if she's
We do
game.
have somebody that's not
Mark,
on
I think
mute.
your audio is on. No, I would just say that I would add to this, there is a Maryland CAV group that is putting together a workshop in Baltimore area in August, and we'll be part of that. But I'll have details soon.
I have one more item on that. Could you go back to the previous slide? Then there was a note. Did I get the date wrong for the next meeting on June 25th? But in the certification policy group, they actually had a wonderful presentation on E-Merchants Trade Council. I learned a lot about the fees and tariffs and everything else put on top of it. That was very interesting. So if we have that recorded, it's something worth going back and looking at.
Yeah, Randy, we do have that on our YouTube channel, and that is Marianne Rowden, who is executive director of the E-Merchants Trade Council. She is a longtime trade lawyer and provided us a great snapshot of what's happening in trade and tariff policies and how it impacts automotive and electronics industries. So, of course, the ball bounces every week, and so I'm not sure how relevant or how timely all the information is still, but we hope to have Marianne back in a couple of months once the dust has settled to provide us some more insights and maybe as a monthly membership speaker. So thank you.
Next slide, please. Some quick observations at PlugFest. We did have one Autotalks-based device tested with the 2024 radio config, which is the SLSS allocated bits, and that was successful. And that's the start. Once all the device manufacturers can demonstrate this, then the industry can decide to move forward with this radio config. We had one OView tried identity certs, and we spoke to them, and they said they learned a lot, and it was a good investigation portion, and we'll need to bring more of that in the fall PlugFest. Literally all the devices did the certificate usage and demonstrated that from all 4 SCMS providers. That was great. And many of them now are using 1609.2.1 besides CAMP, and appears in the fall that we could go 100% 1609.2.1 here. So the way these field test results have been distributed to each OBU participant, we had 2 or 3 of them just did outstanding location accuracy. What I need to know from that perspective is whether they was using any type of RTK or not RTK to get those results, and but they were outstanding regardless of what the GNS services was. Keysight bench results, I've gotten most of them since I've written this slide. We're working on getting the rest of the results from that and making a little headway. So hopefully by tomorrow, I'll have all of that, and so I can put together a summary from that perspective. The OBU drive, I've gotten all but one internal PCAP from the drive analysis. I have sent it over to the Leidos team to analyze here, both the capture and the internal. So we'll go from there. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Randy. We appreciate that. I think we are now ready to turn to our guest speakers. We have 3 of them. We have not only guest speakers, we're going to get a demonstration. I'm very excited about this. So Nick Hagemeyer and Frank Perry both serve on the Omnier board of directors. Nick, of course, with Drive Ohio, leads our RSU, or Connected Infrastructure Working Group. And Frank leads our technical working group, of course, with WSP. Both have been working very hard together with John Weens of Nera Consulting on something called a SIMS tool. So for monitoring connected infrastructure or intersections. Once an intersection has been validated, how do we make sure that that intersection stays validated? So there's a tool that's been developed. I think a lot of work's been done in Utah on this. So I know that all 3 of these gentlemen have been knee deep in this, and we're so excited to see this in action. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Hagemeyer, Mr. Perry, and Mr. Weens.
All right, thanks, Jason. So just a quick intro here. So Nick Hagemeyer is going to kick us off from his perspective, pooled fund study perspective. I'll give a quick overview of the system, and then John will give us a demo. So let me just go into presentation mode, and I will turn it over to Nick.
Sure, come off mute here. So just wanted to talk a little bit about set the stage for this presentation, and I'll be brief because I think the demo is really important. So if you just want to go to the next slide. So the current picture is multiple deployers of SPAT implementations that work independently for their own applications and users. So we have a bunch of independent deployers of SPAT information that are going out there. They're deploying in SPAT in the way that they see it, in the way that their technology works. And you're getting different varieties of SPAT that are out there, sort of like different varieties of toast. And as you can see in the picture there, you know, it's all toast, it's all SPAT, but there's different optional fields that you can enable, you can provide data on, and those work a little bit differently and provide a little bit different information, a little bit different insight, more detailed insight. So CTI 4501, it started out in ITE, it's now an SAE committee. Is really focused on developing development work to standardize implementation. So giving us directions on how to implement SPAT in accordance to enable trust, and then developing the testing requirements. So if you want to go to the next slide, like I mentioned, so standardizing, that enables the trust, but also requires validation. So we talk a lot about validation work within the pooled fund, within the IO community, and really, you know, that validation is achieved based off of 3 steps. So if you want to go to the next slide, I can talk about the 3 steps. And those 3 pillars or steps are, first, installing an Omnier certified device. So obtaining Omnier certification, installing that device is the first step. And then, you know, the second step is performing that initial intersection validation. And then third step is after the initial validation, you know, we have to have long-term monitoring to make sure that it still stays the way that it was meant to stay, and we're still broadcasting, you know, valid messages. So we'll go to the next slide, and some of the things that, and we'll start talking through some of these steps. So first step is Omnier certification. That ensures that devices meet the requirements set forth by industry standards. We talk about certification of multiple things. CV2X Release 1 is focused on certifying RSUs, the roadside units, towards CTI 4001 standard. Randy spoke of CTI 4501 Tiger team led by Eric Ramont, really focused on certification, developing test cases focused on the certification of traffic signal controllers, making sure that they're outputting the correct information in the correct format so that the RSU or an edge processor can take that and broadcast out the SPAT message. And then we talk about sensor system certification, which is something my team, my subcommittee is focused on, maybe later in the fall, late summer, early fall, starting up talking about, okay, how do we start certifying sensors, maybe focused on CV applications, so that we're making sure that we're getting the right geolocation in the right weather environments and in the right conditions. Not just take a sensor out there, configure it once and set it and forget it. Making sure that we're actually deploying things that have gone through the paces and have been tested to meet all of our requirements. If you want to roll to the next slide. The next step is that initial intersection validation. So SAE CTI 4501 we've referred to a lot. They're developing test tool requirements. Those requirements are really based off of a prototype that was developed by CAMP early on. CAMP is also working with Utah DOT to continue their SMART grant to develop and validate that test tool. So making something that's more usable and following all of the new requirements that have been developed with 4501 committee. And then once a validated intersection is achieved, or would be granted SCMS certificates signifying that validation has occurred. So once it's validated, you're going to get an SCMS certificate with a SSP signifying that the validation has occurred and the information should be trusted. So that's sort of the second step in this validation process. And if you go to the next slide, I think we can start talking about long-term monitoring. And this is really where the SIMS comes into play. So understanding that the initial intersection validation is not a trivial task. There's equipment you need to put in the cabinet. That equipment is not meant to be there permanently, but it's meant to be on a temporary basis. So you have to move it from intersection to intersection, to collect some data, perform some analysis, make sure that everything is aligned and we're getting the proper messages, proper data elements within the SPAT and the map are there, and the linkage is there. And once that's done, we don't want to have to repeat that on a frequent basis. And we all know that conditions change in the field. Striping may occur. Mistakes are made. Somebody may, the example that I give a lot is somebody may mean to broadcast or send an updated map to an intersection and they select the wrong intersection by mistake. So we want to catch those mistakes early on and correct them so that we're not broadcasting out mistrusted information. And then also you have equipment failures. So you have to address those equipment failures too and get things back online. So how do we detect those? How do we maintain validation and then subsequently trust? Next slide. So the initial thought with SIMS, the Connected Infrastructure Message Monitoring System, was, can we develop a system that compares basic safety messages from vehicles to SPAT and map messages from the infrastructure? Trying to figure out what kinds of challenges will be uncovered. We had a pretty good stakeholder group, including some OEMs, that kept throwing darts at our project, trying to say, what if this, give us what if scenarios and giving us additional challenges. So that was always good, and it led to I think a pretty advanced system that we have today. And really the idea was, if we don't begin to try to address this now, the IOOs will be in the position to continue to have to do the initial testing on a more frequent basis, and that's pretty like I said, pretty advanced, pretty lengthy process. You can go to the next slide. So looking at the BSM versus the map, we wanted to check the map to ensure that all required components were present, tracking the vehicle movements to ensure the map message aligns with the majority of vehicle movements. And then we also posed the challenge to the WSP team of when do we alert for possible misconfiguration in vehicle versus vehicle illegal movements. You know, we don't want to alert this, hey, something's wrong when somebody just did a U-turn when they weren't supposed to, or did some of other illegal movement, went the wrong way down a road. So just trying to sift out through those outliers and try to figure out, okay, what's the right timing for notating something. Next slide. Then we also did the BSM versus SPAT. So we were reviewing the SPAT message to check for standards compliance, tracking BSM's movements at the stop bar, which presented its own challenges. How do we signify, you know, somebody stopped? Did they stop at the right location? Did something wrong? And so we figured out the BSMs may not truly represent accuracy of the phase changes. Because it may change and somebody may stop later because they were approaching the stop bar. So just having that offset doesn't really give us a good indication of what's going on at the signal and how it compares with the SPAT message. Next slide. So this is where we got into SIMS phase 1 and transitioned into SIMS phase 2. So we wanted to address the challenges that we identified during phase 1. We started integrating the traffic cabinet to identify actual signal indication phase changes. So we're comparing the SPAT to actual phase changes within the cabinet. So the signal indications. We're ensuring SPAT broadcast is actually occurring. You know, we have lots of instances where the RSU says it's broadcasting, but something failed within the process and it's not broadcasting, but it's reporting that it's broadcasting. So we're using a strategy there to kind of check to make sure that they're broadcasting, looking at other devices. We're also including device health and monitoring functionality and generating reports for SEMS providers, because looking at the reports is really the ultimate goal, is to maintain getting that trusted certificate, the SSP signature, SSP signed certificate, so that it says, hey, this intersection is trust. We want to maintain that trust. And then also there was a bunch of other additional IO needs that were identified that we're trying to address. Next slide. And that's it for me. Transition over to Frank.
Okay, thanks, Nick, for that intro. So from the WSP perspective, so WSP, we are the project manager and the design team, and then Nera Consulting actually did the development, implementation, and deployment of the prototype system. So I'll give a quick introduction of the system, provide additional overview, talk about the algorithms a little bit, and then talk about some of the updates we're doing in phase 2, as Nick had mentioned. So again, as Nick had mentioned, right, this is funded through the pooled fund study. So everything that's developed here is open source. It's available on JPO's GitHub. The initial prototype was deployed at 3 intersections in Orem, Utah, as well as 3 intersections in Anthem, Arizona, in Maricopa County. So really, we had kind of 2 objectives here, right? The first one was to develop a prototype to continuously monitor SPAT and MAP messages and evaluate them for consistency against 4501. And then the second one was to, again, evaluate SPAT and MAP, but this time to kind of the almost, ground truth through the traffic signal, through the signal heads versus the roadway geometry, using the basic safety message. So for objective 1 here, we're looking at the SPAT, simple things like SPAT broadcast frequency, per 4501, right? SPAT supposed to broadcast 10 times a second, MAP once a second with some tolerance. And if either of those messages are out of that broadcast tolerance, we'll alert the user. We also evaluate each of the messages against the data requirements in 4501, and I have to the extent possible in there, right? Because there's no equipment today that can meet all of the requirements in 4501. So we took a subset of those data elements that through our experience and working with pooled fund study on a different project, kind of tried to identify what data elements are reasonably, can reasonably be included in the SPAT and map messages. So we're looking at those, we're looking for those data elements. And then we're looking at we're evaluating the messages between each other, meaning making sure that both the SPAT and map have the same intersection ID, same signal groups, and other data element that should be the same, so the vehicle can kind of tie the two messages together for a specific intersection. And then also we're evaluating movement conflicts. So the system's able to detect, if there's a protected left at the same time that there's a straight through, right? We're able to detect that and alert on that. So for objective 2 here, we're using, again, using the BSM, and we're identifying situations where vehicles consistently drive through the intersection when SPAT indicates the signal is red, and then the reverse of that, where vehicles are consistently stopping at the intersection when SPAT says, the signal is green. As Nick mentioned, we're not triggering on one event. We're looking at kind of a statistical analysis, and which is all configurable before we alert the user, the system operator. And for the map message, we're looking for things like, vehicles are driving straight through the intersection in a lane that maybe is defined as a turn lane. Or turning in lanes that are defined as straight through only. Right. And also we're looking at situations where the vehicles may not be in a lane defined in the map. In fact, in Utah, we had a situation where most of the OBUs in Utah are on transit buses, and their bus stops are kind of off the main lanes or the main road, if you will. So every time a bus would pull over at a bus stop, then we would get the vehicle out of lane alerts. And there was quite a discussion within with Utah, and even Utah inside of Utah, as to how best to resolve this. Were they going to update the map messages to include those turnout lanes for the bus stops or not? And I think ultimately they decided not to update the map messages. So we kind of detuned this alert so they weren't getting bombarded. And then so phase 2, I'm not gonna go through everything in this list, but just hit a couple of highlights. So I mentioned that we're currently evaluating kind of vehicle lane conflicts, but now we're going to look at evaluating pedestrian and vehicle lane conflicts. So if the pedestrian has a walk signal, but yet the parallel approach is green, we're gonna alert on that. We're doing some data management, some data cleanup things as well. We also have a message visualizer where you can drop ASN1 encoded maps, SPAT, and BSMs into the tool, and it will render them in a like a not a Google Maps, but in a navigable map. We're also, as Nick mentioned, also we're looking at developing the interface with the traffic signal controller itself. So rather than relying only on BSMs, we'll get the data right from the controller and compare that to SPAT to make sure that there's no issues there. Also, we're including a health and status monitoring system, so you can identify if the RSUs are operational and available and broadcasting. We're also, again, looking at SEMS assertion. So the idea is that the intersection would send kind of a digital report to your SEMS provider to say, hey, this intersection is in good shape, so that the provider then can issue certificates for the RSU. We're also looking at incorporating and ingesting RTCM messages as well as SRM, SSM. We're investigating a stop broadcast if it's identified that either the SPAT or the map are really out of whack. We just want the RSU to stop broadcasting. And then we're also looking to do an RSU broadcast verification. So Nick again mentioned this one. And what we're looking at here is potentially using like a neighboring RSU or neighboring RSUs to identify if a subject RSU is broadcasting. So that's kind of one approach we're looking at. So with that, I think it's time for the demo. So John, I will hand it over to you if you want to show us the Sims.
Thanks, Frank. Looks like I can't start my screen share. There we go. So that coming through okay?
It's starting. Still waiting. All right, there we go. You see it.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this is the Sims Map Manager. So after the data has been processed by the underlying Sims tool, it comes to data analysts to actually figure out why is our intersection broken? What do we need to do to fix it? What caused all these alerts to be generated? And that's where the Sims visualization tool steps in. So this visualization tool is capable of taking in raw ASN spats and map messages that are received in real time from the intersection and rendering out to users exactly what their intersection would look like according to the spats and map. And from this view, it's really easy to see if you have big problems with your intersection, right? So for every green light, you can see the projected vehicle motion. And then obviously, if you have two projected vehicle motions that are crossing on green, that would be a significant problem. All of this data is cataloged temporally. So as we're kind of trying to do our analysis, we can replay this and we can actually see the light states transition over time and see how the intersection is changing as new spats are generated to reflect whatever the intersection state is. From the tool, we also have the ability to find where vehicles are driving through the intersection. So we can look at, we can click on an event where a couple of vehicles might have gone through the intersection, and we can actually see the BSMs and calculate, okay, this vehicle drove through, they did this. As a result, the Sims thinks there's a problem here. Why? Is it because the vehicle did something crazy, or is it because this vehicle's just the final one that did the same crazy thing, and it's actually the spat or the map message that's the problem? So let's see if we can find. So it looks like we've got a little purple dot here, BSM, and we can see that as we step forward in time, that vehicle is gonna move, and we can track all of their BSMs as they go through and across that intersection. The intersection visualizer here also has the ability to show data in real time as it arrives to the Sim system. This is a near real-time platform, so data is continuously forwarded from the RSUs and arrives back here to be viewed by a user within 2 to 3 seconds of it actually being broadcast. So it provides really good reflection of what's actually happening at the intersection from here. This tool also allows users to directly input ASN1. So if you're trying to fix your map or you're trying to fix your spat message, you can get your ASN1, modify it in whatever tool you want, upload that straight into this tool, and we can see what the new map would look like, what the new spat would look like, trying to give data analysts and IOs the ability to fix as well as monitor what's going on with their intersections. Pushing forward into the future, one of the big things that we're adding to this tool is the ability to add more administrative features to RSUs. So not just the ability to receive and analyze data, but also the ability to go off, configure new RSUs, set up forwarding rules, update firmwares, have RSUs talk to one another. So the new CV Manager tool that we've been building out includes the ability to enter in all sorts of RSU information and to actually manage and monitor those globally. We have a central map page here that allows us to see all of the RSUs that we've got hooked into our system. Right now, UDOT is just getting the RSUs hooked into the actual Sim system, so all of them show up as gray dots. But if we had these fully logged in, they'd turn green or red depending on their status. So if they're missing certificates, we can alert on that. If they're offline, we haven't heard from them, we can alert on that. And all of that is readily available to users right from a main dashboard where it's easy to monitor and figure out what intersections are broken and what tasks do they need to fix. The other feature that we have within this is the intersection dashboard. This dashboard is actually where we show the compendium of all the information that's come out of the Sims tool. So as we're going through and we're calculating how many times did vehicles make illegal maneuvers, that's what this table shows, right? We can look at all the good maneuvers vehicle made in blue, And we can look at some of the not so great maneuvers that we've seen vehicles make in red. And from that, we can get a sense of where are vehicles making maneuvers. Are these things like illegal U-turns that are just not identified? Maybe we forgot to put one in a map. Or maybe we just don't have enough data to really discern one way or another. We see a lot of interesting connections from actual cars where people like to lane change in intersections. It's most common, but also making a lot of illegal U-turns. Kind of the actual data behind what Frank and Nick both described earlier. The signal state stop assessment tells us what percentage of time were cars actually stopped at a red light compared to going on a red light, and does that indicate that we might have something wrong with our SPAT signal timing? The signal state passage assessment, where we look at what was the state of the light when the vehicle actually drove through. Are they driving through our green? Kind of looking at the flip side of the stop line stop event. And then finally, we can look at lane direction travel events and see how far off were vehicles actually off from the center lines of their lanes as they were driving through. And that tells us things about, was the map message geometry correct? And do we need anything? It is the top of the hour now, Frank. Should we continue going? What's the plan?
Keep going. It's fine.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
See, find an intersection with some notifications. All of the notifications that the system's generated are logged here as well. So users can go in and see, here's all the notifications the system's generated. They can get some additional details on those. They can actually jump to the map and see the incident where that notification was generated. And lots of great information there on, we found a problem, how do we go about and ultimately fix it? The tool also has ways of making it really easy for non-technical analysts to get raw data. All the users can download maps, SPATs, BSM straight out of the system. They can download all of those in a human readable JSON format. So it's really easy to see, hey, we're missing these fields or we've got something wrong, things like that. They can also download all of the events and assessments that the SIM system is building out to alert that, hey, a vehicle did this, or hey, a bunch of vehicles have done this, and actually get access to raw data for any additional analysis. The final feature that this tool has is the ability to generate longer running reports that can characterize data over a long period of time. So if we wanted to see, for example, hey, we had a problem and then we fixed it, we could actually look at that. The SIMS tool is automatically generating new reports every day, month, and week to categorize data from that. So we can look at things like how far was the actual distribution from vehicles compared to their center lines. We can look at, were they all facing the right way and was that within our allowable tolerances? We can also look at some more intricate details, like what elements were we missing from our map message? And this tool will just tell you right out, you are missing these fields from the CTI 4501 in all of these different places. Same thing for SPATs. We can see the exact fields that we're missing from any of the messages, and all of that's kind of encapsulated in these reports, which walk through all the different events that are generated, the generation by time, generation by lane, and just kind of try and give users all the tools they need to find problems and fix them. I think that's all I've got, Frank.
All right, thanks, Sean. So I guess I know we're a little bit past, but anybody have any questions for us?
Well, Frank, I just wanted to say thank you so much for and Nick and John for a fantastic presentation and demo. We do have an opportunity for questions in the chat box. Please enter those in as you have them. But let me just start the ball rolling and just kind of ask about the sort of status of this tool. Are we looking at a prototype? When do we expect a production version available? When will it be available to IOOs for using for their intersection monitoring?
Yeah, so there is a version that's available right now. I mean, obviously we're still in development, but you can go to JPO GitHub and download it, and we have an installation manual that would help guide the user on getting everything set up. And we are here as a resource as well for helping get set up.
Yeah, we've actually, the pooled fund has actually tasked WSP to be there as a resource for anybody that wants to deploy and try to walk through that manual. If they find issues or they come up with issues that they don't understand that we need to further clarify within that manual, then that's what we're trying to do.
Excellent. And is this, just, and not having been as close to it as you gentlemen, is this paired with any policy that if there is, misconfiguration or legal movements, as you mentioned, recommendations for when to take action, when not to take action, et cetera?
So I think right now we're still working with SCMS Manager on developing that policy. They're doing some work. Frank's involved in some of that on behalf of the pooled fund. And we try to figure out, okay, what is the proper time for a certificate not to have that SSP, not to have that trusted SSP on there. What is the procedure for getting it back? And things like that.
Very good, thank you. Looks like we have a question from Fernando. Is the tool openly available to industry, or is it a proprietary tool?
Yeah, no, it's open source, so Fernando, you can download it from JPO GitHub.
Fantastic. And are there any other questions from the group? Well, that was just an amazing presentation, and thank you all for sort of staying on time and